he could have used that fear and that voice to then point people to a positive future, or at least do something to project a positive future. Instead, all he did was he allowed the fear to get out of control, and then he just continued to use that for his own benefit. There was no bone in his body that was about like making the country better. And he took it personal when the Democrats opposed him on things. Well, that's what Democrats do when you're a Republican. It's what Republicans do when you're a Democrat. And he took that personally.
No, I'm a fanboy of yours. I'll explain why. I think that Jack Kennedy wrote a book called Profiles in Courage, and they were critical of that book in the 1950s. One of the journalists said to Kennedy, well, the book is quite slim. And he said, well, yeah, it's slim because it was very hard to find courage in the Congress. And that was Kennedy's quip and remark about that. And yet here you are at a seminal moment in our history where I think a lot of things are fracturing. And you stood up to President Trump. You stood up for the values of the American democracy and what once was the Republican Party. And so I'm a huge fan. I just have to say that up front, Adam, and appreciate you coming on. Congratulations on the book. How would you describe your political standing right now? Are we a dying breed? And you more so than me because you are a former elected official. I'm just one of those midnight warriors that got fired after 11 days.
Well, good to see you, buddy, and thanks for having me. And I appreciate you speaking out too, and thanks for the kind words. Like, look, are we a dying breed? I guess in a way I would say yes, but like, it's not like we changed and then, our type of people always existed. And it's not like, I guess some have kind of sold out to the Trump cult or whatever, but I don't know, man. It's like, I think ultimately there's going to be a day when kind of, normal thinking, I'll call it, comes back. I think it may have to take another loss or two for the GOP, or maybe it's just this moment where like everybody's kind of ready for somebody to come heal the nation. They just don't know it yet. Like the country was ready for Trump to break the nation. It's just, they didn't necessarily know it. And he kind of accidentally, hopped in at the right time. So I don't know, but I'll tell you, there need to be people like us out there. Otherwise, I don't see how this continues to succeed for the long term.
Well, I listen, for me personally, I have no political instinct. So I actually thought it was going to go the other way. I was 71 campaign stops with Mr. Trump, lifelong Republican, consider myself a moderate Republican. And I considered him a moderate because he was once a Democrat. He was agnostic to things like transgenderism and, abortion and things like that. He morphed. I guess you needed to do that to win the presidency. But Adam, what he was doing, which I respected, and I just want to get your reaction to this, is he was speaking to a class of people, a group of people that feel disenfranchised. We hollowed out, I've had Robert Lighthizer on this podcast for his book discussing our manufacturing policies and our trade policies. And people like the ones I grew up with were directly impacted by this. In fact, I told Mr. Trump that my father's wages, if he had the same union job today versus in the 1960s and 70s, the real living wages are down about 26%, which puts the Scaramuccis on the poverty line. It doesn't put us in the middle class, which is the way we grew up. And so I thought he was championing that. That was a vacuum that was left by the Democrats. They left that space. But it became distorted. It almost became like a Frankenstein monster where now we have all of this hate and we have all of this white supremacy nonsense and so forth. Did he cause that, or was that there and did it bubble up and he became its avatar?
I call him kind of the accelerant. He was the accelerant, right? Like, yes, it was always there. And I think you're right. There was a real particularly where I'm from, the Midwest, that just felt kind of left behind and ignored by the coastal elites. And it's a reality. And so he came along and he gave voice to that. And like you said, it was an opportunity for him to give like a voice to that fear, and then use that like voice. If he was a better person, if he was an actual good human being, he could have used that fear and that voice to then point people to a positive future, or at least do something, to project a positive future. Instead, all he did was he allowed the fear to get out of control. And then he just continued to use that for his own benefit. There was no bone in his body that was about like making the country better. And, you know, he took it personal when the Democrats opposed him on things. Well, that's what Democrats do when you're a Republican. That's what Republicans do when you're a Democrat. And he took that personally. So, but yeah, I mean, look, that is a real, if I was advising Democrats, and they don't really take my advice, but if I was, I would say you have to give voice to that fear of crime. That's a real issue. That's a real fear right now. You know, immigration is a real concern. I'm in Chicago at the moment, and it's like there's these tent cities that are popping up, and people are upset about that. And, you know, give voice to that kind of feeling of hopelessness, but do it with a positive focus. And I'm not sure the Democrats quite know that art either at the moment.
Yeah, well, they've got their own level of insanity going on, right? I mean, they've got this whole unhinged wokeism that's driving everybody crazy. Andrew Cuomo, who I grew up with, the former governor here in New York, said to me yesterday, the exact quote, the three worst words ever uttered by a Democrat, defund the police.
Oh, gosh.
Okay. I mean, the three worst words, right? So we both know that we have craziness on both sides.
Well, can I say to that real quick?
Yeah, please.
What you'll hear is, and you'll probably see it in the comments and you hear it from your friends, they're like, oh, the defund the police. That was like 3 people that ever said that and whatever, and it's not real. Okay, you know, look, I don't know. But I'm going to tell you the perception. If you want to have good advice, let me tell you, the perception is that you guys are all about defunding the police. So if you're not, then go out and aggressively go after this much harder. But if you're going to get mad at me for telling you what the perception is, well, that's on you if that actually does impact the election.
Totally true. I mean, that brings me to my next question, which I think you describe in the book. I'd like to have you describe it to our viewers and listeners. So what happened? You know, the Bob Dole once said that he may not have agreed with George McGovern, but they both served in the U.S. military during the Second World War, as a result of which they had mutuality of respect. And therefore, they may not have agreed on issues of policy, but they agreed on their love for the country and the sacrifices. And of course, in Dole's case, he was wounded in the war, the sacrifices that they made. So there was some level of comity, COMITY. What happened, sir? Why did we get to where we are right now?
Look, I think it's any number of things, but a lot of it is, you know, finance and fundraising is so important in politics, and it just continues to, I mean, like every year it becomes more and more important. And I remember being, you know, showing up in 2010 or 2011, I guess, when I was elected. And, you know, at the time it was all about, you've got to do these big fundraisers. You've got to raise money from downtown, these PACs. You've got to, you know, find the big donors. They'll throw fundraising events for you. Everybody needs to max out. The Democrats became really good at small dollar fundraising. And then the Republicans became really good at it. Well, what's the best way to raise money? What's the best way to keep eyes addicted to television or reading a certain newspaper? It's fear, right? It's if I have you convinced that you're going to die and the only thing that can stop it is me. Like, you'd part with anything, even if you're on a fixed income and Social Security, you'd send me $10 if you think I can stop, you know, Nancy Pelosi or whatever the demon is from destroying this world. And so that fear became addictive. And you can play with the art a little bit of fear in politics, but you have to know when to tamp it down. You have to know when to put that fire out. And I think what's happened is fear has become so profitable and fright has become profitable. And by the way, Anthony, the best way to actually get people motivated is not like fear of the Democrats. It's fear of somebody in your own ranks that's an apostate, right? That's you and I now. You and I are the rhinos. You and I are the ones that don't show sufficient loyalty to Donald Trump. And so some of these news organizations like to go after us the most because that actually drives the most eyes and drives the most fundraising. So I think it's all of it, but I think that's basically how we got to where we are, is just using fear and kind of a loss of this feeling that, look, as a leader, I have to actually put out some good news and good ideas for people. That's my responsibility. There's a loss of that feeling of responsibility.